The baby's name was Eli, Elijah James Park. They had kept it private for weeks, just between them, chosen on a quiet September evening when Ji-hoon had been reading names from his phone and Naomi had gone still and said, "Say that one again." It was the first thing that had been entirely theirs since all of this began. No audience reaction, no room full of people who had no business being there. Just two people and a name that had apparently been waiting for them. Elijah James Park arrived at 5:17 p.m. on a Wednesday in late October, weighing 7 pounds and 4 ounces, with his father's jaw and his mother's eyes and an opinion about everything from his first breath. What nobody tells you about the moment after a baby is born, after the nurses have done what nurses do and the room has settled from its particular intensity into a different, quieter kind, is that the world doesn't pause to acknowledge what just happened. It just keeps going. And the two people in that room have to figure out how to keep going with it, now carrying something new that they didn't carry before, something that cannot be returned and cannot be put down and doesn't care in the slightest about the complicated history of the people holding it. Eli Park did not care about the exam room. He did not care about Dubai or the vasectomy or the drawer labeled "What if she's already somewhere else?" He did not care about paternity tests or therapy sessions or printed lists of OB appointments. He cared about being warm, about being fed, about the specific sound of two voices, one low and careful, one warm and steady, that he had apparently already decided were his. Ji-hoon held him for the first time 3 hours after he was born. Before we go any further, and because the comments from part 2 deserve to be honored the way they always have been in this series, several of you pointed out something important. We never saw Ji-hoon hold the baby. We never saw him ask to hold him. He just stood there with his hand on his back and that was it. You were right to notice that. And that was not an accident in the writing, it was a reflection of who Ji-hoon Park is. A man who doesn't reach for things loudly. A man who had just witnessed the most overwhelming moment of his life and was still, in that moment, processing the weight of it. But you were also right that the story owed you that scene. So here it is. 3 hours after Eli was born, after Claudette had come in and cried in the way she would have described as not crying if anyone asked, after the nurses had done their work and the room had shifted into its nighttime quiet, Ji-hoon was still in the chair beside Naomi's bed. Naomi was half asleep. Eli was in the hospital bassinet beside her, swaddled and asleep and making the small sounds that newborns make. Not quite snoring, not quite breathing, something in between that sounds like a person getting used to existing. Ji-hoon was looking at him. He had been looking at him for 3 hours. After a while, Naomi opened one eye. "You can pick him up," she said. He said, "I didn't want to wake him." She said, "Ji-hoon, pick up your son." He stood up. He stood beside the bassinet for a moment, the way you stand at the edge of something you've never done before and are aware in your whole body that once you do it you cannot undo it. Then he reached in. And what happened when Ji-hoon Park, structural engineer, man of confirmed facts and load-bearing certainties, man who had spent his entire adult life keeping the distance between what he felt and what he expressed, picked up his son for the first time, he made a sound. Not a word. Not a sentence. Just a sound. Low and involuntary, the kind that comes from somewhere south of language, the kind you didn't know you were capable of until something 7 pounds and 4 ounces looks up at you from the crook of your arm with your own jaw and someone else's eyes and decides, in the uncomplicated way that newborns decide things, that you are safe. Naomi watched him. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. If you've been watching this series since part 1, and so many of you have, from Virginia to Louisville to Chicago to New Jersey and everywhere in between, then you know that this story has never been about a perfect love. It has been about a real one. And real love, as it turns out, does not get easier just because the hard part is technically over. The first 3 months of Eli's life were the most beautiful and the most difficult months either of them had experienced. And those two things were not in conflict. They were the same thing. The beauty and the difficulty were the same thing, wearing the same face, arriving at the same 3 a.m. in the same form of a 7-pound person who did not yet understand the concept of night. They were not living together. And yes, several of you asked about that in the comments, and you deserved a real answer. Ji-hoon and Naomi had always maintained separate apartments. Two independent adults in a committed relationship who had not yet taken the step of sharing a home. The Dubai months had widened that gap without either of them naming it. And the pregnancy, followed by everything that followed the pregnancy, had meant that the conversation about what are we building and where are we building it had been postponed by more urgent things. But postponed conversations have a way of arriving anyway. They arrived on a Tuesday in January. Eli was 11 weeks old. Naomi had been up since 2. Ji-hoon had come over at 6 with coffee and groceries because that was what he did now. He showed up in the mornings with coffee and groceries and stayed until the afternoon, then went back to his apartment to work, then came back in the evening. Every day. He was essentially living there. He just didn't live there. Naomi, sitting at her kitchen table in the specific exhaustion of a woman who has not slept more than 3 consecutive hours in 11 weeks, looked at him pouring coffee at her counter and said, "This is ridiculous." He looked over. She said, "You have a drawer here. You have toiletries here. You have a key. You put our son to sleep here every night. And then you drive across Atlanta to sleep in an apartment you're paying for that you don't actually live in." He said, "I know." She said, "So what are we doing?" He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't want to assume," he said. She looked at him. "Ji-hoon, at what point does not assuming become avoiding?" He set the coffee down. He sat across from her at the table, the same table where she had eaten toast and told him she wanted the DNA test, the same table that had held more important conversations than most tables ever hold, and he said, "I want to move in. I want to find a place together. Not your apartment, not mine, something that belongs to both of us. Something Eli grows up in that was chosen for him." He paused. "I want that. I've wanted it for months. You put it in the drawer," she said. He almost smiled. "I'm working on the drawer." She looked at him for a long moment. "Find us a place. I'll give you 60 days. 45. "What?" "I'll find something in 45 days. 60 is too long." She looked at him. Something shifted in her face. Not a smile exactly, but the thing that lives right next to a smile when it hasn't quite arrived yet. 45 days, she said. He found something in 31. A house in Decatur, not large, not showy, but with the specific bones of a place that knows what it is. 3 bedrooms. A yard with an oak tree that Naomi stood under for 10 minutes the first time they visited and didn't say anything, which Ji-hoon had learned by now meant yes. A kitchen with real counter space. A room that got morning light that they both, without discussing it, walked into and stood in for a moment and understood was Eli's. They signed the lease on a Friday. Claudette helped them move in on a Saturday. She did not cry. She also did not stop telling Ji-hoon where things should go, which he accepted with the patient equanimity of a man who understood that Claudette's involvement in their life was not negotiable and was actually something he had come to rely on in ways he hadn't expected. On the first night in the new house, after Eli was asleep in the room with the morning light and the monitor was on and the boxes were still mostly unpacked and the kitchen was not yet organized and the oak tree was dark outside the window, Ji-hoon and Naomi sat on the floor of the living room eating Thai food out of containers because there was nowhere else to sit yet. He said, "This feels right." "Yeah. I want to say something." She looked at him. "I know the last year has not been what either of us planned," he said. "I know what I did in that exam room. I know what it cost. I know we've been doing the work and I know it's not finished and I know trust is something you rebuild in years, not months." He paused. "But I need you to know that this house, this life, this person we made, this is not a consolation prize for me. This is not me making the best of a situation. This is what I want. You are what I want." He looked at her directly. "I know I've been bad at saying that. I'm saying it now." Naomi looked at him for a long time. "I know," she said. "I need you to actually hear it," he said. "Not just process it. Hear it." She was quiet for a moment. "I hear it," she said. "And I want you to hear something back." She put down her container. "I spent a long time after the exam room asking myself if I was staying because I loved you or because I was pregnant and scared. And I know the answer now. I'm here because I love you. Because you are the person who showed up differently when it cost something. Because you held our son for the first time and made a sound I will never forget as long as I live." She paused. "But Ji-hoon, I need one more thing from you. Tell me. Stop treating forever like it might be taken away from you. Stop living in the house and keeping one foot at the door. You're here. Be here. He looked at her. Then he said, "Okay." Not the okay of a man closing a conversation. The okay of a man opening one. Now, if you thought this story was over, it wasn't. Because life, as anyone over a certain age has learned, does not wait for you to finish one thing before it sends the next one. It was March. Eli was 4 months old. The house in Decatur was beginning to feel like home. The boxes were unpacked, the kitchen was organized. Naomi's design, I had done things to the living room that made Ji-hoon walk into it sometimes and just stand there for a moment, and the oak tree had started doing what oak trees do in the Atlanta spring. Ji-hoon had been in a series of back-to-back client meetings all week. He came home Thursday evening tired in the specific way that work-tired feels when you have a 4-month-old at home. Not like rest is a possibility so much as a rumor. He came through the door. Naomi was in the kitchen. Eli was in the bouncy seat on the kitchen floor doing the thing he did now where he watched everything with his father's focused intensity and his mother's warm curiosity.
Ji-hoon kissed Naomi.
Picked up Eli. Sat at the kitchen counter. Normal. Ordinary. Exactly what he had always, without being able to say it, wanted. Then his phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at it. He went very still. Naomi, at the stove, said without turning around, "Everything okay?" He said, "Yes." It was not yes. The name on his phone was one he hadn't seen in 4 years. Stephanie, his ex-wife. He didn't tell Naomi that night. Not because he was hiding it. Because he didn't know what it was yet. The message was brief. Ji-hoon, I heard you have a son. I need to talk to you. It's important. Please call me. And he had read it 3 times and put his phone face down on the nightstand and told himself he would deal with it in the morning. He did not sleep. At some point around 2 a.m., lying in the dark beside Naomi with Eli's monitor casting its soft green light on the ceiling, he made the decision he'd been circling around all night. He reached for Naomi's hand. She was awake. Of course she was. 11 weeks of Eli's sleep schedule had given both of them a particular alertness at 2 a.m. that they had not asked for and could not seem to return. "What is it?" Stephanie texted me. The room was quiet for a moment. Naomi said, "When?" "This evening." What did she say? He told her. The exact words. He did not edit them. He did not soften them or reframe them or wait to see what they meant before he told her, because that was exactly what the old Ji-hoon would have done. He would have put it in a drawer. He would have figured it out alone first. He would have come to Naomi with a resolved situation rather than an open one. The new Ji-hoon, the one that 31 Thursday mornings in Dr. Shin's office had built, told her in the dark at 2 a.m. with the monitor casting green light on the ceiling. Naomi was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Call her tomorrow. Find out what it is." And Ji-hoon, "I'm telling you everything," he said. "Whatever it is." She squeezed his hand. "I know." He called Stephanie the next morning from his car, parked in the driveway of the house in Decatur, before he went inside. She answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice was the same. That was the strange thing about people from your past. Their voices don't age the way you expect. She sounded like herself. Like 4 years hadn't happened. "Thank you for calling." "What's going on, Stephanie?" "I saw something online. About you and a woman. A baby. I need to know if you reversed the vasectomy." "No." "Then how?" "Recanalization," he said. "The procedure failed. Years later." "Stephanie," he said carefully, "why does that matter to you?" The next pause was longer than the others. And then she said something that rearranged the morning entirely. "Because I've been trying to get pregnant for 3 years. And my doctor told me 6 months ago that the primary issue may be on my ex-husband's side. That an undetected vasectomy reversal, natural or surgical, in a former partner could affect fertility assessments going forward." She stopped. "I'm not trying to cause problems. I'm not coming back into your life. I just need a copy of your medical records from the original procedure and the follow-up. For my fertility specialist. That's all." Ji-hoon sat in the car for a moment. Then he said, "That's all." She said, "That's all. I promise you. I'll have my doctor send them directly to yours. Give me the contact information." She gave it to him. Then she said quietly, "You have a son." "Yes. I'm glad for you." I mean that. He sat with that for a moment. I know you do. The call ended. He sat in the driveway for 5 minutes. Then he went inside and told Naomi everything, word for word, the way he'd learned to do. Now, here is where this story could have gone wrong. Here is where a lot of stories do go wrong. Because Stephanie, for all that she was being reasonable and was genuinely only asking for medical records, was still Ji-hoon's first wife. Still a woman who had known him when Naomi didn't exist in his life yet. Still someone who was, suddenly, present in the edges of a life Naomi had fought very hard to build. And Naomi Carter was a woman who knew her own history, who knew what it cost to be doubted, who had been accused in a medical room and had offered a DNA test she shouldn't have needed and had given grace in amounts that exceeded what most people could have found. She was not a woman who was going to pretend she felt nothing about this. She sat with it for a day. She talked to Dr. Webb about it. She talked to Claudette about it, who said, "The records request is reasonable, but I want to know why she couldn't have contacted his doctor directly without going through him first," which was a fair point that Naomi had also thought and was choosing to approach carefully. And then she had a conversation with Ji-hoon that was one of the most important conversations in this entire story. She said, "I need to tell you how I'm feeling about this. Not to make it a problem. Just because I promised myself I would say the fear out loud before it became something else. Tell me. I don't think she wants you back. I actually believe that. But I also know that when an ex-wife appears with a reason that requires your direct involvement, even a legitimate reason, it creates a space. And spaces have a way of being filled by things that weren't supposed to go in them." She looked at him. "I need to know that you're going to be aware of that space and guard it." He said, "I already handled it. The records go directly from my doctor to hers. No further contact required." "That's not what I'm asking." "I know." He paused. "You're asking me to tell you that she doesn't have access to anything that matters. That the space is closed." He looked at her directly. "It is. She was my past. You and Eli are my life. That is not a close decision." Naomi looked at him for a long time. "Okay," she said. He said, "Okay. And Ji-hoon, thank you for telling me at 2 a.m. instead of putting it in the drawer. I'm working on the drawer." "I know. Keep working." But Stephanie did not entirely disappear. Not because she was malicious. Not because she wanted Ji-hoon back. But because life is rarely that clean. 3 weeks after the records were transferred, Ji-hoon's mother called him. She had been following the situation. Ji-hoon had told her about Eli's birth, about the house in Decatur, about the plans he was forming, and she had been warm about Naomi in the careful way that Korean mothers are warm about things that are not yet official. Present but watchful. His mother said, on the Sunday call, "Stephanie called your aunt." Ji-hoon went very still. "Why?" he said. It was not a question. "She wanted to know if you were happy," his mother said. "She wanted to know about the woman. About the child." Ji-hoon said, I know. She had no reason to contact anyone in our family. I know. That was not appropriate." His mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that surprised him. "Your aunt told her you were the happiest she had ever seen you, and that the woman was good and strong, and that the child had your jaw." And Stephanie said, "I know. That's why I'm asking." Ji-hoon sat with that. Then his mother said, "Ji-hoon, I need to ask you something." "Ask." She said, "Are you planning to make this right? Officially?" He was quiet. "Because that woman has given you more grace than most people have to give. She gave you a child she didn't plan. She offered a test she shouldn't have needed. She forgave you in a hospital room when you were still learning how to deserve it. And she is still not your wife." Ji-hoon said nothing. His mother said, "Fix that. Whatever it costs your pride. Fix that too." He told Naomi about the Stephanie and the aunt situation that same Sunday. All of it. The call to the aunt. What the aunt had said. What Stephanie had apparently said in response. Naomi listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She contacted your family?" "Yes." "After the records transfer?" He said, "Yes." "Ji-hoon, I need you to hear me say something, and I need you to not respond defensively. Okay. A woman who only needed medical records does not call your aunt 3 weeks later to ask if you're happy. That's not what that is. She looked at him steadily. I'm not accusing her of trying to take you back, but I am telling you that she is not done with something. And I need you to decide clearly and out loud what your position is. My position is that I am going to call her and make clear that contact with my family is not appropriate and will not continue. Naomi said, and he looked at her, and that I am building a life with you and our son, and that my past does not have an address in that life. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Make the call, she said. He made the call. Stephanie, to her credit, heard it. She apologized for contacting his aunt. She said it had been a moment of weakness. Curiosity she should have managed better. She wished him well. She meant it. The call lasted 6 minutes. When he came back inside, Naomi was feeding Eli in the chair by the window with the morning light on both of them, and she looked up at him, and he sat on the arm of the chair beside her, and she leaned against him slightly, and Eli looked up at both of them with that focused attention he'd inherited from somewhere, and the house was exactly what it was supposed to be. April. Eli was 5 months old and had recently discovered that if he smiled at Ji-hoon a certain way, Ji-hoon would make whatever sound or face he wanted for as long as required, which Eli found scientifically interesting and Naomi found completely hilarious. It was a Saturday morning. Ji-hoon had been quiet in a specific way for about 2 weeks. Not the old quiet. Not the drawer quiet. Not the Dubai quiet. A different quiet. The quiet of a man who is organizing something. Naomi had noticed. She had not asked. Because she had learned, in the particular education of loving Ji-hoon Park, that some things needed to arrive in their own time, and asking too early interrupted them. On that Saturday morning, he asked her to get dressed. She said, "Where are we going?" He said, "Out." She said, "That's not an answer." He said, "I know." She looked at him. She got dressed. He drove her to Piedmont Park. Atlanta in April is one of the things Atlanta does best, warm without being heavy yet, the trees doing everything trees do in the spring, the city visible in the distance doing the things cities do when you're far enough away that you can see it whole. He had not brought Eli. Claudette had Eli. Naomi had known something was different the moment she realized Claudette had Eli. They walked for a while. They didn't say much. The park was doing its Saturday morning thing, joggers, dogs, families, the particular ease of people who have nowhere to be yet. At some point Ji-hoon stopped walking. They were near the lake. The light was on the water. An older couple nearby was feeding ducks with the unhurried commitment of people who had been doing this together for a very long time. He turned to face her. She looked at him. He said, "I need to tell you something and then ask you something, and I need to do them in that order." She said, "Okay. The thing I need to tell you is this. I know what the last year cost you. I know what you carried and what you offered and what you chose to forgive and what you chose to build when a lot of people would have walked away from the rubble entirely. I know that I asked you to trust me again before I had fully earned it, and you did it anyway, and you did it with more grace and more strength than I deserved." He paused. "I know that. I carry that. Not as a debt, as a fact about who you are." She was very still. "And the thing I need to ask you," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket, "is whether you would be willing to make this official. Not because of Eli. Not because of the house. Not because of anything except that you are the person I want to walk toward every day, and I don't want there to be any more ambiguity about that." He was holding a ring. Not extravagant. Not a performance. A ring chosen by a man who had looked at many rings and picked the one that looked like her, warm and clean and quietly beautiful without announcing itself. He said, "Naomi Carter. Will you marry me?" Naomi looked at the ring. Then she looked at him. Then she looked at the older couple feeding the ducks, who had both stopped and were watching with the particular delight of people who have been married long enough to root for it in strangers. Then she looked back at him. And she said, "You found us a house in 31 days. He said, "I did." She said, "You answered the phone on the first ring. I always will. You picked up your son and made a sound I will never forget." He said, "That one wasn't planned. I know. That's why it mattered." She looked at the ring one more time. Then she held out her hand. Yes, she said. If you've been with this story since part 1, since the exam room and the cold laugh and that's impossible, then you know that this moment is not a fairy tale ending. It is something better than a fairy tale ending. It is two real people who went through something genuinely hard and came out somewhere they didn't know they were headed and built something that the beginning of their story had no right to become. They got married in September. Not a large wedding. Not a production. 32 people in a garden venue outside Atlanta on a Saturday afternoon when the Georgia heat had finally started to let go and the light was doing the particular golden thing it does in the South in September. Claudette was the maid of honor. She cried. She would have described it as not crying if anyone asked. Jihoon's mother flew in from Incheon. She met Eli for the first time 2 days before the wedding and held him for 45 minutes and spoke to him in Korean and did not cry in a way that was entirely unconvincing. Sungjin was there. He had done the work of becoming someone Naomi could be in a room with, not through grand gestures but through the ordinary consistency of a man who understood that he had to earn back what he'd lost in that exam room one interaction at a time. Dr. Osei was not there, but Naomi thought about her during the ceremony. The woman who had said there's your baby and then said Mr. Park, were you and Ms. Carter together 8 to 9 weeks ago with the specific precision of a doctor who understood that sometimes the most useful thing you can do is ask the clarifying question. The vows were not scripted. Jihoon had written his in his head during the drive to the venue and delivered them the way he delivered everything that mattered, quietly, precisely, without performance. He said, I spent most of my life believing that love was something you held carefully so it wouldn't break. You taught me that it's something you hold to not against breaking but through it. I am a better man than I was the day I met you. Not because of time. Because of you. Because you required me to be. Naomi had written hers in the bathtub the night before, which she told him, which made him almost smile. She said, I need you to know that I didn't choose you because I was afraid of being alone, or because I was carrying your child, or because forgiveness felt like the easier option. I chose you because when I imagine the person I want next to me when things are hard, you are that person. Not the version of you that had it all together. The version that learned how to show up even when showing up was uncomfortable. That is who I chose. That is who I'm marrying. The officiant said the words. Jihoon put the ring on her finger, the same ring from Piedmont Park, the warm and quiet one. Eli, being held by Claudette in the front row, made a sound at the exact moment they kissed that the entire room laughed at. He was 5 months old and already had opinions about timing. There is one more thing that needs to be told. Because this story began with a woman being called a liar in a room full of people who had no business being there. And it needs to end somewhere that answers that beginning. 3 weeks after the wedding, Jihoon and Naomi had dinner with Sungjin and his wife Mai at a restaurant in Buckhead. A real dinner, not an obligation, not a peace negotiation. An actual evening among family. Mai had not been in the exam room. She had heard about it from Sungjin, who had apparently told her with the specific edited version that men tell their wives when they know they were wrong but aren't sure how wrong. Mai was sharp enough to know the edit when she heard it and had asked Naomi directly, at some point during the evening, what had actually happened. Naomi told her, calmly, matter-of-factly, without drama. The way you tell a story that happened to someone you used to be. Mai listened. Then she looked at Sungjin. And Sungjin, to his credit, to the credit of the man he had been working to become since that Saturday in August when he'd come to Naomi's apartment without armor, said, I should not have been in that room. I knew it the moment I walked in. I stayed anyway. That was wrong. Mai looked at Naomi. Naomi said, he apologized. We moved. Mai said, good. Then she raised her glass. To people who do the work instead of just saying they will. They raised their glasses. Eli Park turned 1-year-old in October. The party was in the backyard of the house in Decatur, under the oak tree that Naomi had stood under for 10 minutes on their first visit and said nothing, which had meant yes. Claudette made food. Jihoon's mother made food. There was too much food, which was the correct amount of food for a Korean-American black family celebrating a first birthday in Atlanta in October. Eli sat in the middle of his first birthday cake. Literally in the middle of it because he was 1 year old and had decided that was where he was supposed to be, and looked at the assembled faces of the people who loved him with the focused attention he'd had since his first breath and the particular expression that was entirely his own. Not his father's jaw only. Not his mother's eyes only. Something that was both and was also neither. Something that was just Eli. Just this specific person who had apparently decided to exist despite every complicated thing that preceded him and had been doing so with great confidence ever since. Ji-hoon stood behind Naomi with his arms around her, watching their son in the middle of a birthday cake. She leaned back against him. He said, "Can I tell you something? Always. That day in the exam room, when I said that's impossible, I've thought about that moment 1,000 times. I've thought about what I should have said. What I would say if I could go back." She waited. "What I should have said was, I don't understand this, but I know you. And whatever this is, we figure it out together. That's what I should have said." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You said it eventually. It took too long. It took exactly as long as it needed to take for you to mean it." He held her a little tighter. Eli looked up from the cake and found his father's eyes across the yard and did the thing he'd recently learned to do, the smile that was specifically for Ji-hoon, the one that Naomi said he'd been studying and practicing and deploying with deliberate precision, and Ji-hoon made the face back that Eli wanted. Naomi laughed. Claudette, standing nearby, said, "He has got that man completely wrapped." His mother, beside Claudette, said, "Good. Before we end, and I mean this, some of you have been here since a woman sat in an exam room and held herself together while the person who should have been her safe place chose fear instead. You watched her stay steady when staying steady cost something. You watched her offer grace in amounts she should never have needed to find. You watched her say, 'I forgive you' in a hospital room at night, not because everything was fine but because the work had been real and she was a woman who kept her word. You asked the hard questions in the comments. You noticed when Ji-hoon didn't hold the baby. You pointed out that a medical records request doesn't require a call to someone's aunt. You said the DNA test needed to happen and you were right. You kept the story honest. This story was for you. For every woman who has ever been doubted by someone who should have been certain. For every woman who has ever had to prove something she should never have been asked to prove. For every woman who has ever chosen to stay in something hard because she could see, clearly, past the fear and the failure, what it was capable of becoming. You know who you are. Fear makes people cruel. Proof doesn't erase damage. Trust is fragile. And love, real love, the kind worth the work, the kind that shows up at 3 a.m. and answers on the first ring and picks up its son and makes a sound it didn't know it was capable of. That love doesn't just survive the hard things. It becomes them. It becomes the thing you look at from the other side and say, that is how we got here. Strong and steady. Just like the heartbeat. Right from the beginning. If this story found you, if any part of Ji-hoon and Naomi's journey felt like something you needed to hear, drop a comment below and tell us what moment hit you hardest. Like this video if you stayed till the end. And if you're new here, there are 2 more parts to this story waiting for you. We'll see you in the comments.